Welcome to this episode of the Talent Forge, where together we are shaping workforce behavior. I am excited to bring in a fellow ATD member. For those of you that don't know, the ATD is the Association for Talent Development, and I got to meet Rose at a conference not all that long ago. So I am excited to bring her in here to have some beautiful conversations. Rose and I have a lot of shared knowledge in some different spaces, and I am excited for you to learn from her today. So, welcome to the show, Rose. Glad to have you.
Thank you very much, Jay. I am really excited to have an open conversation with you and see what interesting things we get into.
Yes, definitely. So, Rose, tell me first, how did you get into the space of talent development? Like, what was your interest? What brought you in there? And sort of what excites you about it?
Well, the easier question is what excites me about it. And honestly, it's twofold. I absolutely love that you just get to learn random stuff. Right? You never know what kind of skills you're going to be developing, what kind of behaviors you're going to be developing, and it leads you down these paths of having to learn fairly quickly all kinds of interesting things from, physics lessons and pneumatic lessons for Marines driving expeditionary fighting vehicles to sales negotiation and consulting skills and relationship building. So you never know where it's going to go and what you're going to get to learn. And that is fantastic. As far as how I got into it, I am one of those rare birds who always wanted to do it. When I was a kid, I used to come home from school, redesign the lessons, and teach them to my stuffed animals. So I was always going to do this.
I love that. And so often we hear on the show, oh, I fell into it accidentally. I did this and then I got there. So it's really interesting to hear the perspective of wanting to get into this space. And I'm going to say I do echo. One of my favorite pieces is this week I'm working with engineers. Next week I'm working with doctors. The week after. So I get to play a little of all of those on TV. That's actually one of the parts that really fascinates me too. So tell me more about this though. You come home and redesign the lessons. Was it because there was like a sense of like I can do this better, or was it one of those of like that didn't land for how did your brain quantify wanting to do that? What did that look like?
Gosh, well, my 9-year-old brain, I think, just was excited about having learned something and was turning it over in my head and going, oh, here's a way it makes sense.
Mhm.
Let's try this. Here's a way for me to share my knowledge. I was a pretty precocious child, and half of my family are professors. So, that wanting to share knowledge and quite frankly, probably talk about it more than I should, was always in there, always driven by example. So I think it was just my way of sort of making sense and sharing, which has always been my MO for learning something. If I can share it with somebody, I'll know it better.
I love that. And it's so true because one of the things that I have found, and it is well documented amongst the research in learning, is when you start teaching something or when you start sharing that knowledge with somebody else, whether it's the drive to bond that sort of like creates that shared connection, or that's the actual, hey, if I have to teach this, I better know it a little bit, whatever that aspect is, we do tend to remember, recall, and also retain more of the information. So, for those of you out there that are learning something, go teach somebody immediately afterwards. You are highly likely to actually retain it, be able to recall it, and be able to use it. So, Rose, you have a lot of knowledge and experience that you're able to retain, recall, and use. Talk to us a little bit, and I want to kind of start. One of the things so long ago it wasn't all that long ago, but so long ago when I got to see you speak at the ATD conference, you had such a great presentation. I thought it was so fascinating, and it was a very novel way to do it. It connected with me immediately with some of my past experiences. Do you recall which one I'm talking about? I don't want to put you on the spot here.
I'm pretty sure it was on workplace outputs as the goal of training.
Yes. Can you speak to that concept? Because I think that the way that you framed that was probably one of my favorite talks in a long time because it was all about outputs, getting people to actually have a return on investment for the dollars that they're putting into training, which is something that is so important and something I've been a big advocate for. So the way you framed that, the way you shaped that, I thought was really powerful. And there should have been 100 CEOs sitting in that room listening to this and saying, this is where we should be putting our dollars. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, gosh, that's high praise. So let me see if I can talk as eloquently as your compliments. Um, so let me give an example first, because I can talk about all the benefits and talk about it in these highfalutin terms, but let's land the plane to begin with. A really simple example would be, let's say you're onboarding technical trainers, facilitators who are going to teach people how to maintain HVAC systems, for example. Onboarding might traditionally look like, here are the tools, here are the systems, go explore the equipment, try some troubleshooting. But what if for those trainers, onboarding, the output of onboarding is you have created your facilitator guide, right?
Gosh, I love that. And the funny thing is when you say it, people are like, huh, well, that seems like it could be logical. You're actually creating something that's going to be a business value beyond just training somebody, but actually going through the structure and building that. But nobody does this. Help us understand why is it that most talent development does not come into place with creating something like an output, like here's the facilitator guide for future use and use cases or future onboarding, etc. Why, what is it that stops us from getting to that level?
Well, it's really hard, quite frankly. When we think about learning and performance, we're often pinpointing a performance issue or a specific need. People are X and we need them to be able to do or produce Y. And it's easy to default to knowledge. We all know that. And then it's really, we have this great hype around scenarios and story-based learning. Let's actually have them practice in a safe space. But I think it's a lot harder to say, let's practice in the real space. And by the way, it's not practice, you're actually doing it. So, a great example for those who are maybe more executive minded would be this concept of human in the loop when using AI. So, let's say you've got an AI agent that will flag potential fraud for a credit card company. The human in the loop says, before they freeze that account, somebody has to review it, right? So you've got to train all these people in the workplace now to work with AI. So what does that look like? How do I come up with my plan for reviewing that flag? And if instead of training on, here's how you prompt the AI, here's how you make a decision, here's the algorithm for it, here's the decision tree, instead you train people on having to make the correct decision. The output is the correct decision. Now, what's cool about this and why it's so hard is because you have to get into the way of doing work, right? So you're not giving people a program on how to interact with AI. You're building interacting with AI into creating that output. So you're flipping it on its end. So if you are in a company where people need to collaborate, like let's say you're creating a high volume patient plan for a ER or emergency department. If you're creating that or updating that, you've got to talk to a lot of people. You've got to talk to the nurse manager, you've got to talk to the hospital admin, you've got to talk to data analysts. There's lots of steps and whatnot. Instead of training somebody on here's who you talk to, here's what the plan needs to include, you create the plan. And the blended learning includes, who do I talk to about this? When do I talk to them? What inputs do I need? And you're actually then imbuing the way of working into getting that output.
I love that phrase, the way of working. And I think about this because traditional training, traditional talent development. I go to a conference room, I sit there, I listen to somebody tell me what I should do, how I should do it, and why maybe, I'm going to say, why I should be doing it that way. And I say maybe because we would think that that would be a part of it at this point in time, but it's not always. So we get often the how and the what. We don't always get the why. Sometimes we do. And then we leave there. And then the expectation is that we can just, monkey see, monkey do. I just learned it. So now I can go do it. And actually, the way of working, I think, is such the novel concept. And for those of you listening in, I really want you to think about this because the outputs that come from these trainings are often the return on investment for spending money on trainings. And I've seen way too many L&D departments getting cut, getting slashed, people losing positions because, well, things are uncertain, economies are uncertain. And one of the first things to go is talent development. And that's really sad. If you want to elevate your status as a strategic business partner and not a luxury item inside of your organization, you've got to figure out how to impact the way of working and the outputs that are coming. That it's going to be, I put $1,000 in and I save myself 1,500 later. If we're not thinking like that, more than likely your talent development, your change management programs are going to get cut. Is that a fair statement, Rose? Is that your experience? What are you looking at when you're implementing some of this type of training?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said something really smart there, Jay. So, this concept of ROI, and yes, as an industry, we have been talking about it forever and ever and ever. But here's something really interesting. If the outcome of your training is an actual value added output, workplace output for the company, two things happen in terms of ROI. One is you can be a little more confident in your correlation. That training, the output of it, was a work product. We can therefore better correlate that that training resulted in something of value, right? That disconnect is it gets a little shorter. You can follow the chain of evidence more confidently. And then there's the obvious one, which is yes, you have a return on investment because you created something of value for the organization, right? You didn't create knowledge, you created an actual thing that's going to be used upline or downline, and you created it in a way that reinforces how you want your company to work, that built fundamental skills along the way, like how to interact with AI, how to work across departments, how to break down silos. So there's a really big advantage here in terms of getting the bang for your buck.
And I think that's huge. And we're going to step back into this AI in just a moment, but can you give some other examples of maybe some of the outputs? Like broaden the audience's mind. You had mentioned, obviously the HVAC one, but what are some other examples of outputs that could be created through the learning experience or training experience that would be a value proposition to any organization? What are your thoughts on that? Even if it's just a kind of a short list.
Gosh, I think, risk management plans, right?
That's a
Creating a
great.
risk management plan, keeping it updated, business continuity plans, absolutely. Performance management plans, right? So the output would be you actually have your plan for how you're going to manage performance. That's aligned with, how the organization wants to do it. Sales enablement is a big one. So that could be anything from, um, better using, AI to better predict which leads are likely to close and coming up with, my plan for how I'm going to follow up on that, right? Actually have my plan for making those database decisions, for making those predictive decisions, creating marketing campaigns. How do I, the output of that might be the actual campaign itself. It might be agent, the agentic workflow in the CRM is the output, right? And you're actually creating the output through the training. And the tricky part then is you design the training to create the output, not just step one, get some data, step
Right.
two, make a decision. But it's, step one is you have to get the data. Here's how to look at the data. Go talk to this person who's going to help, understand this part, if that kind of collaboration is important to your organization. And then you have natural checkpoints along the way, right? Because we're not just talking about the workplace output, full stop. We're talking about the workplace output to a specific set of standards and requirements, right? And there's no better way to evaluate somebody's work than by looking at the real product of it. The biggest barrier, I know I'm kind of going on a path here, but the biggest barrier I see is clients will tell me people don't have time to look at other people's work. And I say that is a big fat lie because they're either going to look at it or they're going to redo it. And that's the same amount of time.
Yep. Or they're going to look at it under crisis, right? You
Yes.
can either do this now. And it's funny you say that. Like one of the, and I didn't know what this was called and or even the concept of it, but one of the very early trainings that I developed. So part of my educational background was in crisis management and crisis
Hmm.
communications.
Hmm.
And one of my very early trainings was essentially the output was here's your crisis communication plan and here's the different strings. But it was teaching them like, okay, this is how people think in this stage of the crisis. What would we need to do? How would we need to do this? And then we would literally develop like, here's the first communication. Here's the first communication template that we're going to send out. It's going to do these four things. Let's put the information in there. And by the time that we would finish the program, they literally would have a start to front, like open the book. Step one, here's where we need to be. Step two, this is who we need to contact. Step three, this is how we get everybody on the same page. Step four, this is how we send out the first piece. So the training was teaching them not only the psychological mindsets of themselves, the organization, the audiences, etc., but it was also about them building something that in the event of a crisis, they've got a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so when you were sharing your presentation, I was just like, it was one of those things where I was like, this is so brilliant. I accidentally and like after your session, I'm like, here's the 9 things that I would do differently now that I've learned to kind of make that a little bit more formatted and even sort of I'm going to call it a little bit more polished, a little bit more toned. But I thought it was such a cool concept because I accidentally kind of stumbled into that just because I felt everyone should have a crisis plan.
Right.
Almost nobody did. So it was one of those things where it's like, all right, this is what you're going to get. But putting the value on that, and it's funny because I have had clients come back and say, we had X happen. We had this crisis plan. No one panicked, and it worked, except for usually it was a except for this one part. And it's like, okay, well, we can train to that part now, but you're out the plan. So I just really loved that. So thank you for sharing that with the ATD, and thank you for sharing it with the audience here today. Audience, be thinking about this. When you're enacting some level of talent development, what is the output? How are you going to actually make a long-term organizational difference? How are you going to help your teams to have something? This is a really cool model. And Rose will share her contact if you ever want to reach out to her about some of these different things later on in this episode. I want to go back to AI. I know you've
Mm-hmm.
been doing some pretty cool study and work in this space. Tell us a little bit about what is your experience and, sort of what has you excited about that?
Oh, well, there are again, I'm going to go with the two answers. From an L&D perspective, I think L&D is positioned in a really interesting space to help figure out what working with a digital coworker looks like.
Hmm.
Right. So L&D has long grappled with sort of elusive capabilities. What is critical thinking? What is resilience? Right? What are those things? What is agility? How do we pin that down? What does that look like in action? And now we're going to be faced with taking some of those more elusive behaviors and pinning them down, creating capabilities. What does it look like to work with an AI or digital coworker? What does it look like to be a human in the loop? That's very different. And L&D can get into a space where they're helping to find that because we do have those set of competencies as an industry. The other part about AI. So right now I'm in an executive ed program for AI transformation and leadership. And what I'm finding most fascinating is how future built companies are really doing it. It's a co-ownership model between the business and IT. There's FinOps at play. You've got to get the data structure right. You've got to get an interoperable tech stack. There's a lot of base requirements. And everything that I am learning, all of the research, everything from the big four consulting firms, all says your talent strategy better be in there.
Yeah, I can see that that would, and unfortunately, I mean, what is your experience? And I'm going to ask this. I've got at least some experience. What is your experience with organizations and or businesses being ahead of the curve when it comes to AI?
Oh, what a great question. So there is a framework where you look at organizations in terms of their AI adoption from stagnant, lagging, emerging, and future built.
Mhm.
And if you look at those future built organizations, they have an AI operating model. They're not using AI for productivity, which I think is where a lot of people get stymied. So using it for productivity might look like, generating content, segmenting your customers more quickly. But when I say using it to create value, I'm talking about a return that shows up for shareholders.
Mhm.
Now, what those companies are doing differently is they're starting with the fundamental strategy, a clear strategy and vision. Co-ownership, like I said, between the business and IT. They have an actual investment plan with ROI clearly stated for how they're going to structure AI. They mandate near-term gains when you're talking about going from your central infrastructure out into departments and how they're using it. Near term, they're mandating near-term gains. And then, like I said, the talent strategy. That seems scary, I think, to a lot of small and mid companies because the investment seems so high to get the fundamental platform, hybrid cloud, whatever you want to call it, ecosystem set up. But when we talk about value, think about a supply chain and agent to agent ecosystems, which is where one agent can talk to another agent and do stuff on its own, essentially. So think about supply chain. Something breaks down in the supply chain, a supplier's not going to come through. Your AI agent can go talk to other suppliers' agents, negotiate an alternate avenue, an alternate supplier, figure it out, get it all done, and by the time your people come in, they have an email that says this supplier wasn't able to meet demand for whatever reason. We negotiated. It's now coming from these people. It'll be here in this time. Right? That's what we talk about with value that shows up for the shareholders.
Huge, all while somebody's sleeping. Now, take the human in the loop concept because I know that that would be, I know that there are some people, whether it's a manager or a leader out there that's listening, that's going, that's terrifying. What if it hallucinates? What if it makes this mistake? What if it, I still want to rely on my purchasing team to be doing the negotiations. Like, what's the answer to that? Because there are some legitimate fears out there. Don't get me wrong. I just recently asked Chat GPT, and I was having a little bit of fun with it. I was like, "What about this song by this band?" And it came back, and it was like, "That song doesn't exist by this band." I'm like, I'm literally looking at my iTunes, and I'm like, "That song, that band." I'm like, "You're hallucinating. Please look again." And of course it comes back. So we've all experienced something, whether it's a small hiccup or whether it source some information from Reddit and shouldn't have happened. How do we get sort of the attitudinal change? And that's really where I think that there is some aspects of that attitude can come from fear, that attitude can come from this is taking away as opposed to leveraging growth, etc. How do we get past that attitude barrier that may be holding some companies back?
Well, that's a big barrier. First of all, let me apologize for putting everyone to sleep, and I'm going to try to make this a bit more interesting. So, there's a concept that generative AI, predictive AI, agentic AI is this big thing and it's trained on everything. But if you're going to do it well for your organization, you're going to pick the precise model for the tasks at hand.
Mhm.
So when you're having that kind of precision strike, you do get you can get a better handle on hallucinations. And if you have a virtuous cycle of training that particular model in its specific use case, then you also can avoid model drift, right? Where training becomes sort of outdated, and I'm talking about the AI training data. It becomes outdated, and so your model drifts. And those two are the big ones: AI hallucination and model drift. Now, that's a really key concept. You deploy the precise amount of compute power needed for each task, and you have strict governance. So you're not kind of going out there into the gooey mass of everything. You have a fundamental, AI infrastructure that has data and whatnot, but then you go out into the departments and the specific tasks and use cases get the computing power they need. Just doesn't go big and get everything. And in doing that, first of all, it's a huge cost savings. And second of all, the governance becomes a lot easier to put into place.
And I want to piggyback on that because it was actually interesting to me. And this is audience. If you're using AI and not training your AI, you're making a mistake. And what do I mean by training the AI? And I thought that this was and it's really interesting because I've seen AI used where it's a search engine. All right, it's basically the new Google. I've seen it used at some very advanced levels. One of my colleagues, one of our certified guides in behavioral elements, is actually literally building out some incredible models. Spent hundreds of hours of time training it to actually do like personalized coaching towards managing health outcomes with pre-diabetes and things like that. So like some really advanced things, really
Yeah.
cool stuff. Now the AI, teaching the AI all of the knowledge related to different medications, to different pieces to be looking for, inputs, outputs, all of it. Really, really cool. I think in some cases, one of the fastest pieces that people can start doing is teaching its AI what it's allowed to look at and what it's not. So, audience, here's a quick thing. And again, just did a talk on this when in the ATD behavioral science SIG. And it was interesting because I was like, how many of you are actually telling your AI you are only allowed to look at these resources from Harvard Business, from this, from this, from this. You are not allowed to look at Reddit. You are not allowed to look at this. You are not allowed to look at this. Now, help me come up with a strategy or a plan for X, Y, and Z. And they were like, you can do that? And it was just like, okay, yes, this is what you should be doing. That training piece, I think, is really fascinating because people don't realize like AI is not a one-way communication model. It should be a two-way where it's iterative and back and forth. So, do you have any tips on training AI? From the individual level, not even necessarily the corporate or the enterprise level. Are there things that you have done to make sure that your AI is more dialed in than say just the regular? I've gone to chat and opened up a new talk. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So, I do some of what you said. Don't look at this, right? I've also had a conversation with my AI of choice, which is Claude, um, about the kinds of sources that I view as credible
Mm.
and not. And then I've had it sort of save that search and recall it, right? So maybe in a later prompt, I'm telling it, hey, remember that chat we had? Put that into play here. Um, I also will ask it to, if it ever cites anything, give me a link so I can go verify it myself.
Yep.
And then, that's when I'm using a broad Gen AI model, right? But there are specific models that even individuals can use now. So, for example, a Claude Cowork, which is sort of a productivity tool that integrates with your personal computer. And it's not out there trained on everything that a generative AI large language model is trained on, right? It's looking at your data. It's going, what's spam? What's not? What kind of emails do you want to respond to first thing in the morning? What should I bubble up? How do I, tell you, hey, you're going to need some time to prepare for this meeting. Based on the notes from your last call, these are your action items, right? That's not out there being trained on everything. That's actually a really fun space to play around because it's smaller And you can start telling it, this is important to me, this isn't. This is valuable, and you're right about this, but you're not. So getting in and playing around with those kinds of models is really helpful versus trying to tackle wrangling in a huge model like ChatGPT or Claude or whichever one you want to use.
I love it. And I'm gonna share this, and we've had enough conversations. You probably figured out that I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to some of the tech, some of the science, and particularly behavioral science. But there is a mixture between feeling like an adoration for Tony Stark, Iron Man.
Yes.
So I have taught my AI different protocols. So I
Oh,
have, something like research protocol one, which is the highest level research protocol. It knows it is only allowed to look at peer-reviewed journals, particularly I have an entire list of them
there you
if it's
go.
doing this type of thing. Research protocol two is like you're allowed to now dip into things like Forbes, Wall Street Journal. Research protocol three is you're allowed to look into something like Psychology Today or some of the things where it's not all peer reviewed. There's articles, there's
Yeah.
guest contributions, etc. So I've set those up. I do also have Christmas protocol, which is like, hey, I need to actually do my Christmas shopping. So,
Love it.
I've got a number of different protocols, but I've trained it to know when we dip into a particular protocol, here's the parameters that you're allowed to do. Here's the things I don't want you to do. And I just have little names for them. So that way it makes sense for me that I can say, hey, we're doing research protocol one, jump in there. Here's what I'm looking for. Find me 15 articles that say X. And then I've got, a nice list, or let's synthesize this. Let's find what are the patterns that we're seeking. But it knows how to look at those things because the first several times it didn't work. So then it was like, okay, you did this. That was smart. I want you to continue to do this. I want you to stop doing this. I want you to expand on this type of thing. We don't think about training the machine. We think about the machine training us too often. And I think it's really important that general users start really looking at it as that two-way.
Yeah, and this goes right back to our primary topic of workplace outputs. Um, that when you're creating something at work, and we're all going to be using AI to do it, right? So, what you just talked about, how do I make the AI better? And not just the large language model that our company has adopted, but in this workflow, when it has told me, hey, you need to, this is a human in the loop moment. Um, are you able to make it better? Are you able, right? So in even if you're creating a marketing campaign, there's a moment where you have to learn through creating that output to make the AI better at giving you what you need. And that becomes part of the training that gets you to that output. So instead of attacking it and going, you need to learn how to make your AI work better for you and have these ideas for, workflow design and whatever, it's now part of the training to get to that output.
Love that. So with this executive ed program you're working in the AI and leadership space, how do you see yourself working with organizations? Like if you were to say, hey, my ideal here is I want to help organizations do what? What does that look like for you? Because I know that your internal is the teacher. So you're going to be teaching this and moving that forward. What does that look like in that space?
I really want to join an organization where my enjoyment of creating a framework or an approach out of complexity and chaos is going to come into play.
Hmm.
Where my desire and sort of natural inclination to create a team that's quite resourceful and share some enthusiasm to get that done comes into play. So it's more about again, back to ways of working and the way my brain works. And I want to work in a space where that's valuable, but also where I'm going to learn, which is the whole reason why I'm doing this AI program. It's not because I'm out there going, I need to be this, AI great person. Otherwise I'm never going to get a job. So we're like, wow, I'm very curious. And AI is such a systems concept. So it kind of works with my desire to see systems, to improve the internal logic of a system to make it better. So I'm leaning a little bit towards the operations space, more strategic operations. And AI is just going to be a part of that moving forward. Now, having said all of this, let me be very clear. I am not a technical person. So, big disclaimer for anything I've said. Um, I just give really good face when I'm with tech geniuses.
No, I love that, Rose. And the best part is so the first time that I spoke on AI, I did an international conference all on AI. I'm the only non-tech person there, literally the only non-tech person there. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not a coder. I'm not somebody that can build something. I understand some of the background, but not all of it. Uh, but I understand people. And in order to get the technology to work, you have to have the people component and that human in the loop. So usually when I'm brought in on something, I'm with you. I'm not a tech person. I dabble. I like it. It's fun. But that human side and the thing that I think really resonated with me with what you said is the tech is a tool. And if you don't have a system in place to manage the tool and the interactions with it, all you're going to do is create more chaos. And I see a lot of companies doing that now by not creating the systems for how do we interact with AI? How do we create this as a future program or future opportunity? So I'm going to ask you kind of one question before we close out our conversation. First of many, I hope. But the question that I would have is if I'm in the audience and you were to say, I want to start, and I was to say, I want to start moving to sort of that futuring of AI. What is maybe one of the first things that I should be thinking about, acting on, or doing to move me more from the I'm using it as a search engine or I'm using it for efficiency, as you said, to that long term? What is something that I should be thinking about doing differently or even just starting in order to get there?
Yeah, so wow, gosh, there are so many starting points. I would say look at your workflow end to end, not a single part, but end to end. And what are the big questions? So, for example, in HR, well, let's go L&D. That's our audience, right? L&D and HR. So
HR.
you're looking at the life cycle of an employee. So you start with how do we attract the talent? And how do we bring them in? How do we get them going? How do we keep them going? How do we make them happy? So you look at that entire workflow end to end and go, how can we reimagine this? If we want to meet a person at every step of the way and have them feel a certain way or experience a certain thing, how do we reimagine that workflow? That's where you start. Because when you get into, hey, how do we make our hiring decisions faster? You're going to have all of these little different AI inspired projects and pilots and experiments. Your resources get spread too thin. It's wasted money and nothing is coalescing to create actual value. You've just created little pockets of efficiency.
Okay, I'm gonna say I love that because we just started that process in our behavioral elements team of
Mm-hmm.
looking at the entire workflow of recruiting new guides, onboarding them, helping them reach their first sets of training success and coaching success to building out their enterprise and everything else. And we're looking end to end on this one. And we've been utilizing some AI in there to help us. What are our gaps? Where is somebody going to get a hiccup? What is their experience? Or even looking at like attitude and looking at enjoyment and frustration models. So
Yes.
you said this, and I was like, oh, we're doing it right. So Yeah, no, that's very cool. Rose, if our audience wanted to get in touch with you and tap into the wealth of knowledge and experience that you have in this space, how would they do so?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm pretty good at checking it. However, if you really want to slide up into my messages, I would just use rosebenedicks@gmail.com. That's last name is Benedicks.
Perfect. We will make sure that that's in the show notes. Rose, thank you for joining us today. Like I said, when I had first seen you at that ATD conference, I knew I wanted to have a deeper conversation with you about the outputs, about being able to build a training program that's actually creating business value. I was so enthused and excited about the talk. Still am, obviously. And I'm hoping that the audience can see the value of like, wow, we can do actually more than just knowledge transfer, but we can actually build tools, systems, and experiences that are going to build our thing forward. And I think with the knowledge you're sharing today and the excitement that you share it with, it becomes much more real. So thank you for joining us.
Well, Jay, thank you so much. And I got to tell you, um, I only learn things from other people. That's my MO. So I am really interested in people contacting me because they have something to share. I spoke a lot, but I also want to learn.
That's amazing. So, audience, don't hesitate to reach out to Rose, and I'm sure that we're going to have you back because there's a lot more to talk about. But thank you, audience, for tuning into this episode of the Talent Forge, where together we are shaping workforce behavior. Thanks again, Rose.
Thank you.